put on by the Energy Environment Commission, joint city-county commission that advises the city and county about policy issues. My name is Lawrence Lyle. I'm the chair of the Energy Environment Commission. And we're going to talk a little bit about some proposed legislation, background of it, some things that have informed what this is. We're going to hear comments by people, both pro and con. As usual in these kinds of meetings, we'll try to limit those comments to 3 minutes. There's also a written list back there. If somebody wants to make a written comment, they'll be collected by city staff later. So I wanted to try to introduce this issue a little bit. With some show and tell. Here's my shopping bag. People have talked about this as a paper or plastic question, and that's the wrong question altogether. Plastic is one of the most awesome inventions of the 20th century. Almost anything we're wearing, any computer we use, our glasses, our clothes, the chairs we're sitting in, everything's made out of that stuff. It is an incredible invention, and it's a shame to be throwing it away in a single-use product, a product that's used for 20 minutes, possibly once more to line a trash can, and then thrown in the landfill. So that's what got, that kind of thinking is what got us started on this. We were assigned to study this issue by the City Council. We were given some proposed legislation that came from the Sierra Club and asked to study that. We took a look at, we sought input from stakeholders, grocery stores, plastics manufacturers, city landfill staff. I was surprised to learn that there is a city landfill employee that has to run around the landfill chasing blowing plastic bags. The landfill personnel tell us we spend about $15,000 a year chasing plastic bags around landfill. That is effort that could be spent doing something probably more important. However, by law, we have to pick up the trash there. I was also surprised to learn that plastic bags get caught in the equipment at the landfill, at the material recovery facility where we recycle bottles and cans. Bags get caught in the gears there, and they have to take it apart to clean them out. That costs in delays and downtime. So there are direct costs to the city. But then we find out there are costs to the environment that end up having larger and larger impacts the farther downstream they go. They end up as litter here. They call them urban tumbleweeds. They end up in trees and that kind of thing. They're the third most common item that our stream teams and our litter crews pick up. They end up in our, they ultimately end up in our creeks. And then they're starting to break down into smaller and smaller bits. By the time a bag ends up in the ocean, it can be microscopic bits of polyethylene, where it continues to break down into molecules that are possibly more toxic. We'll hear some more about that later. Polyethylene is a rather benign substance, but once the sunlight breaks it down, it becomes a toxic substance. And so we believe that there are impacts that are very important that we should be considering when we're using the convenience of a bag in a store. The first presentation we're going to have, we've got Carolyn Amperon, chair of the Osage Group Sierra Club. We've got Melanie Cheney, who's the assistant program manager of Missouri River Relief, and Jan Dye, who's a member of the Environment and Energy Commission and also a member of the Sierra Club. So they will talk about local impacts and details of the proposed ordinance.
Hi, I guess I should stand by the mic. Hello, I'm Jan Dye, and we'll start out by explaining that the Osage Group, which is an arm of the Sierra Club, proposed some legislation to ban plastic bags. I guess this came about we started working on it in the spring and proposed it to the City Council in October. And we have a little short video clip we'd like to play here. It's from a film that we sponsored a screening of a couple of months ago in November about plastic bags. Plastic bags are the #1 consumer item in the world. And this clip will illustrate the enormous numbers of plastic bags that we use each year.
Plastic bags as we know them appeared in grocery stores in 1977. And in this very short amount of time, we're up to consuming about 1 million a minute. World plastic bag consumption is estimated at about 500 billion bags per year. So how did we learn to shop like our grandparents did? I mean, we haven't always had plastic, right? What if we shopped using our bags over and over, old school? Some say that plastic bags have been singled out, that they become an easy target, that there are much bigger environmental issues out there. So why pick on plastic bags?
It would be great to come up with the real cost of a plastic bag, because that is the #1 consumer item in the world.
Okay, so I'm Carolyn Amperon, and I'm the current chair of the Osage Group of the Sierra Club, and so I'm going to take it over from here. Push the right button. Okay. So first, before we launch into some of the other parts of the presentation, we wanted to just cover some of the plastic bag or plastic facts to help educate you on that subject. And so based upon some surveys and studies that have been done, the average shopper in the United States uses 500 plastic shopping bags every year. So that's the average shopper. And that's if you don't use any of these reusable kind like he was talking about earlier. And so based upon that and the population of Columbia, that means just right here in Columbia alone, we use 57 million shopping bags every year of these plastic disposable variety. Another fact that's important to know is, where do plastic bags come from? Well, they're made of some kind of fossil fuel product, either from oil or from natural gas. And so based upon that, if you look at the 100 billion plastic bags that are used in the United States every year, that's a billion with a B, those plastic bags take the equivalent of 12 million barrels of oil to produce. And another thing we wanted to look at was how many cities have implemented some kind of regulation related to plastic bags. So Columbia certainly will not be the first. There's over 173 jurisdictions in the United States that have implemented some kind of ordinance related to restricting plastic bags. And several more are looking at ordinance right now, like we are. Some of the reasons that these cities and counties and states have implemented these ordinances is because of the litter problem that's been mentioned. the problem with clogging stormwater drains and stormwater systems, which can result in flooding, the problems with the impact on wildlife, and a variety of other problems, but just wanted to give you a few of those. And a lot of people say, well, we can recycle them. Isn't that fine? And the problem there is that right now, according to other statistics, only 12% of the bags are recycled. So if you think about that, there's 57 million bags being used in Columbia, and only 12% of those are recycled. So that's a lot of millions of bags that are ending up in the landfill or as litter in our landscape or our streams. As was mentioned earlier, there's a group in Columbia led by the stormwater educator for the city who cleans up our streams on a regular basis. They're all volunteers, and they get out and they clean up the litter that is left by other people. And in that process, they find that the number 3 primary source of litter is a plastic bag. And so one of the reasons they clean up the litter is, one is the impact on the environment, but two is to keep that litter from clogging up the stormwater system, which we all count on those streams and creeks for our stormwater runoff to prevent flooding in our neighborhoods. The other area that there's an increased cost to the city is people putting plastic bags in their blue recycling bag. And some of you may not be aware, but the City of Columbia does not recycle plastic bags. So if you're putting a plastic bag in your blue recycling bag, then you're just helping raise the cost at the recycling center, because those bags have to be manually sorted out of the recycling stream, and so that takes people power. And also those bags can get caught in the recycling equipment, which means then they have to stop the whole process and clear the jam. So even though the City of Columbia has thankfully started taking all plastics number 1s through 7, I just want to emphasize, for the sake of education here, that still means no plastic bags. So if you want to recycle your plastic bags, you have to take them back to the stores that have recycling bins for plastic bags. Okay, another problem with plastics and plastic bags is that they don't biodegrade. And this is something I learned when we started looking into this process. They photodegrade. And what that means is that they only break down when they're exposed to sunlight. So that's one reason why the bags that end up on the landscape and in our streams, waters, and oceans are a significant problem, because that's where they're exposed to sunlight and that's where they begin to break down. And so what happens is these bags, they break into smaller and smaller pieces. So you can see here on the slide, we have a person who's holding in their hand a whole lot of these plastic bits. And so these are plastic bits that have washed up on the shore of some body of water. And so give you an example of what we're talking about when we talk about these plastic bits. And we'll talk more about why this is a problem. But while the picture is up on the screen, I want you to look at them and recognize why sometimes wildlife can mistake these for food, because they do break down small enough, and they can, be colorful, like a variety of small fish, for example. And so that's why a lot of wildlife mistakes them for food. So what happens to them when they're not exposed to sunlight? So maybe they're buried under a lot of other trash at the landfill. Well, in that case, since they don't biodegrade, they have to have sunlight to degrade. They just really stick around for a really long time, and so they're filling up our landfills. Okay, so we've talked a little bit, it's been mentioned that plastic bags and other plastics are harmful to wildlife. Well, this is well known because there have been many studies of wildlife, and you don't have to look too far on the internet to find many pictures of animals with soda rings around their, some part of their body, or they're caught in a plastic bag of some form. So there's a lot of evidence that this is harmful to wildlife, but there's actually been some studies done. The European Commission did a study of North Sea birds and found that over 90% of the birds that they examined had plastics in their stomach. And we'll see another video segment from the movie Bagot that talks a little bit more about another study it's been done on some bird wildlife. Another animal that I wanted to mention that is really threatened by plastic bags is sea turtles. And sea turtles are already endangered for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is because a floating plastic bag looks a lot like a floating jellyfish to a sea turtle. And unfortunately for them, in this case, the jellyfish is one of their favorite foods. So when they see that floating plastic bag, they go right after it, and they eat it, and then they end up with a clog in their intestinal system. And so unless they happen to be found and taken to one of those marine sea turtle hospitals, they're going to ultimately die without human intervention. Another area that we need to think about, and this impacts us as humans, is our human food chain. A lot of people in the United States and around the world depend on fish for their one of their primary sources of protein. And so one of the important things to understand is that plastics, through the studies that have been done and based upon the chemicals that are in the plastics, it has not been proven that these are safe for humans. And in fact, it has been, some of the studies have shown that we actually need to decrease our exposure to some of the chemicals that are in plastic, like BPA, for example. And Dr. Vamsal, who's here tonight, is an expert in that area, and he'll be available during the Q&A. And so if we need to decrease our exposure to these chemicals that are in plastics, what is the impact when these chemicals begin entering our food chain? And how does that happen? So we talked earlier about how the plastic breaks down to these small plastic bits, these particles of plastic. Well, the problem becomes magnified. It gets worse, because it turns out that when these plastics are floating around in our waterways, they actually are absorbing the toxins that are in the water. And I think most people are aware that there's a lot of toxins in our water through runoff from farms and fertilizers that we use in our yards, and just a variety of places that these chemicals enter our environment, and they end up in our water. And unfortunately, these plastic particles act like sponges, and they soak up these toxins. And so then when an animal comes along and eats that particle, then they are absorbing that toxin. And so then as this moves up the food chain with bigger and bigger animals eating, the smaller ones, we end up, particularly with fish, with a lot of toxins in the fish that come from this plastic problem. And there's some of the studies that have been done on these plastic particles in the ocean. Some of the persistent pollutants that they have found include PCBs, DDT, which has been outlawed for a very long time but still persists in the environment, PHA, and BPAs. Okay, next we're going to watch another clip from the movie Bagot, and this clip will show a little bit more in depth about the persistent organic pollutants, as they talk about, which is what I was just referring to as those chemicals that persist in the environment, and the effect that it has on wildlife. And then after that, Melanie Cheney is going to come up and talk to us about the impact that they see from plastics and plastic bags in the Missouri River.
According to Dr. Erickson, the plastic in the ocean is carrying toxins at high concentrations. Animals are then eating the plastic fragments. They think it's food. They just open up their mouths and take a big gulp. What amounts to a big gulp of persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. These are chemicals and toxins like DDT, DDE, and PCBs, among others, that latch onto plastics and become super concentrated. The plastic acts like a sponge.
And then when the plastics are mistakenly eaten by marine life, toxic chemicals go with them. When you eat a large fish like a swordfish, it might be the 5th step in the food chain, because it's eaten a smaller fish that ate smaller fish, and they ate zooplankton, and eventually they ate phytoplankton. And at every step, you're getting a multiplication factor of 10 times or 100 times or even 1,000 times those chemicals. And the plastics are facilitating this. They sort of sop up the toxic chemicals and concentrate them in their flesh so that we can end up eating them on our dinner plates.
This is Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where plastic is having a direct impact on the fate of the Laysan albatross.
Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge is home to the largest albatross colony in the world. These birds are fantastic flyers. They forage throughout the Pacific. But because they forage so far, they're really good indicators of the health of the Pacific and what's happening out there. In the 1950s, when people looked at dead albatross at Midway, they didn't see any plastic at all, and it wasn't until the 60s we started to see it at Midway and in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Every dead bird at Midway has plastic in them. So this is kind of the extreme, plastic everywhere and very little food. 19 caps of some sort, and then of the 19 there were about 14 bottle caps. The plastic they use for the top isn't recyclable right now, so maybe that's one of the reasons why you find so many plastic tops around.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight. My name is Melanie Cheney, and I work with a not-for-profit based here in Columbia called Missouri River Relief. Our mission is to connect people to the Missouri River, and we primarily do that through river cleanups and education events. River cleanups really accomplish a few things effectively by getting people out on the longest river in North America. Many for the first time. People gain more of an appreciation for this amazing resource that's right in our backyard. Cleanups also educate people about the problems of solid waste in our rivers and physically bring communities together to create something positive and real results. River Relief is part of a network of over 5,000 stream teams in Missouri. And we work with a large number of agencies, organizations, and partners up and down the river, including some of the best volunteers in the world. So since in 14 years, over 20,000 River Relief volunteers have helped to remove more than 800 tons of trash from the Missouri River. That's 1.5 million pounds in 14 years. And we've organized cleanups in communities from St. Louis, where the Missouri River meets the Mississippi, all the way up to Yankton, South Dakota, 800 miles up the river to the first dam. And it's important to note that Missouri River Relief, we don't take a political stance. We do river cleanups, and really education is just our main goal, to educate people about the issues that are facing our waterways. So you'll see some examples in the next few slides. So how is all this trash getting into the river? The main source is stormwater runoff. Litter on our streets gets washed into storm drains and directly goes into our streams. So every time it rains, the majority of trash flows directly into our streams, which then flow into our rivers and eventually the ocean, where plastic outnumbers plankton in some places. I've noticed a huge influx of trash recently downtown, and unless we start doing something proactive to prevent this trash from entering our waterways, we are contributing to a big problem. So this stormwater trash is accumulating in places like this. This is a floating pile of plastic just downstream of Kansas City. We've been working on it for several years. Every time it rains, there's new trash that gets flushed in, and it's not exactly an easy thing to clean up. At River Relief, we like to say that we all live downstream, and the water that comes out of our tap is from the Missouri River. Millions of Missourians get their drinking water directly from the Missouri River. So the question I think we should be asking ourselves is, are we doing enough prevention and outreach to prevent this trash from entering the river and keeping our water clean? And this is just another example of kind of the worst that I've ever seen. And this is on the Mississippi River, which the Missouri flows into, just downstream near Memphis. So single-use plastics, they're made to use once and then throw them away. It's the number one item that we find on the river. The top three would be plastic bottles, styrofoam, and plastic bags and wrappers. Much of it floats and accumulates in piles like this, whereas the majority of plastic bags and wrappers we find are caught up in willow trees along the banks of the river, many of which are already broken down into fragments by the time they reach the Missouri. As they said earlier, plastic bags are one of the top 3 items that Columbia Stream Team volunteers pick up. You could take a walk down to the Hinkson Creek or the Bear Creek or any creek in Columbia, and this is pretty much what you're going to find. Let's see. So one of the big issues is plastic bags. Plastic, it doesn't biodegrade. Instead, it breaks down into these microplastics. Estimates say that plastics could be around for as long as 500 years, but no one really knows how long. So these are just some examples of microplastics on the Missouri River. Sioux City, Iowa, just directly below a stormwater outfall. And then in the lower right is a cleanup we did last summer with some Summers at Mizzou students, just downstream of Columbia. And then further down the river in St. Charles, Missouri, there's just this muddy beach with tons of little tiny plastic fragments. And we're also seeing impacts to wildlife locally. This snake was found last spring at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi by our volunteers. It was dead, and it appears to be entangled in some kind of green mesh plastic, maybe the kind that you would get your oranges in or something like that. And then just a photo of a bird nest that is entwined with different bits of plastic wrappers and bags. And then more commonly, biologists that are sampling these big rivers they're sampling for the endangered pallid sturgeon. Most of what they catch is the shovel-nosed sturgeon, which is pictured here. And it's not the first time that they've pulled out fish that this one is entangled with a rubber band that's impacting it. So this is also a more common thing that we're seeing on the river as biologists are out there sampling some of our wildlife. So obviously there's a much larger problem affecting our marine environment. And on a larger scale, 267 species have been documented that are entangled or have ingested plastics. Fish that are filter feeders, like the one in the photo, are ingesting these plastics as they would plankton. And then we mentioned how plastics are known to soak up pollutants and bioaccumulate through the food chain. Well, fish like tuna or mahi-mahi are just 2 examples of the fish that eat other fish, like this one in the photo. And I think Dr. Vamsal, who's here tonight, can better speak to this from a scientific background. But what does that mean for us? In nature, everything is connected. So if you're as fascinated as I am about this issue and want to learn more about it, you can check out my blog. It's called Plastic Soup News, and you can just Google it. It's important to educate people about the impacts of single-use plastics and litter in our environment. Society has demonstrated that to successfully create positive change, we often need a little bit of engagement and persuading action. Efforts to clean up our air and water, wastewater treatment, for example, or banning the chemical DDT did not happen voluntarily. So as a society, we are addicted to single-use plastics. They're free and they're plentiful, and I personally believe that they're unnecessary and excessive. We are dealing with a product that has an inherent design flaw. They're lightweight, they're aerodynamic, and they do not biodegrade. So I feel like something like a reusable bag could really just be one small thing that we could do to help a much larger problem. It's safe, it's sustainable. So thank you very much.
So we have another video clip for you. This one will show you some places on the map of where bag bans have been implemented. And this, I do have to make one comment here that this is a little dated. It's about, I'd say, 3 or 4 years old. So there's a ton more now, but they're not on this map. So here we go.
Plastic bags are being banned around the world. From New Delhi, India, and Bangladesh, where plastic bags were clogging storm drains and were contributing to severe floods, to the Kingdom of Bhutan, where bags were banned to better foster gross national happiness. In 2008, China banned ultra-thin plastic bags. It's estimated that in the first year, it eliminated 40 billion. In May of 2009, the state of South Australia banned plastic bags, hoping to set an example for the rest of the nation. Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Zanzibar, and South Africa have all banned ultra-thin plastic bags. Many countries and cities in Europe have either banned or placed fees on plastic bags. Ireland placed a fee on plastic bags and reportedly reduced consumption 90% in the first
Year. Sorry about that. Our next few slides, we're going to go over some of the highlights of the proposed ordinance. The biggest one is the ban itself. The ordinance states that stores will not be able to distribute single-use plastic bags at the checkout or the point of sale. And then the ordinance also defines what a store is, so that's clear. A store is a grocery, drug, convenience, or retail establishment, which includes any of the two following things: a self-service retail store that sells a line of dry grocery, canned goods, or non-food items, and some perishable items, or a store that sells a limited line of goods that includes milk, bread, soda, or perishable snack foods. So basically, this is going to cover any store that sells perishable food items. The next thing in the ordinance, one of the highlights, is that stores will be able to give you a paper bag if you happen to go to the store and forget your reusable bags and you're caught without something to carry your bags home in. The paper bags will cost you a minimum of 10 cents each. The stores are not required to offer paper bags, and some of the stores that do reward you for bringing your own bags now can continue to do that. There's nothing in the ordinance that prevents stores from continuing to, give you a nickel back or however much they're giving you back. Or in the case of one of our local stores that gives you a little token, and then you can then use that to donate to your favorite charity. The fee for the paper bag is waived for certain low-income customers. These are customers that are on food assistance programs like WIC or SNAP. There is an exemption that allows restaurants to use bags, the plastic bags. There is an exemption for produce bags, so you can still continue to put your lettuce or, there'll still be those produce bags in the produce section of the store. And when bags are used for sanitation, and what that means is raw meat or something that could spread disease. Then the effective date of the ordinance would be 6 months from the time that the council passes the ordinance. Sorry, I forgot to advance that. So, Carolyn is going to come back and talk about some of the common objections, which I'm sure that there are some. So, Carolyn?
Thank you, Jan. Okay, so over the course of working on this, we have talked to a lot of people. We've been talking to people about their opinions about a plastic bag ordinance. And so, of course, we've gotten a lot of feedback. And so I just wanted to cover some of the common objections and some feedback on those. And then, of course, you may have some new ones to bring up in the question and answer period. So the first one that we get, and I would say the most frequent one I've heard, is that I don't want a ban on bags because I reuse my plastic bags. And there's a lot of different reasons that people have for how they reuse the bags. One of the most common is for cat and dog owners who frequently clean up after their pets. And as the owner of 2 large dogs, I certainly understand this dilemma. And I certainly wish I could train my dog to do what the dog in the picture is doing. But I just want to say that for those who have used the plastic bags, that there are still going to be many sources of plastic bags available to us for those that want to use them. So, for example, Jan mentioned the lightweight produce bags are still going to be available. These also, you can also find them in the bulk food section. And you can also use a lot of, you get a lot of plastic bags from things like frozen food. And there'll be a lot of stores in town that will probably still use plastic bags, like clothing stores, hardware stores that don't sell groceries, other stores like that. So for those people who really feel that they, need a plastic bag, they are available. Also, you can purchase bags to clean up after your pets that are both biodegradable and compostable. So that's an option as well if the ordinance should go into effect. Another way that people use the plastic bags that they commonly refer to is as trash can liners. And this is something that, as it was mentioned in the first video clip, we only started having plastic bags available to us in around 1977 or something like that. So, certainly we've been throwing trash away and cleaning up after our dogs for a long time, earlier than 1977. So we can find ways to not use plastic bags as trash can liners. You could use a paper bag, for example, or you could just not use any liner and you empty those small trash cans into the bigger trash bag that at this time we in Columbia put out on our curb or take to our trash receptacle. So one of the things to think about is, these are a convenience, and there are ways to live without them, and so that's what we'd like people to think about for those who reuse their bags today, or to reuse some of those mini bags that probably just end up in the trash today, like your frozen vegetable bags, for example. Okay, the next objection is, well, why can't we just recycle them? And of course, we talked about this a little bit earlier, in that today only about 12% of the bags are recycled. And we've had the opportunity as citizens, and there have been green movements for a long time telling us the importance of recycling, yet still we don't do it. So we don't think it's a matter just of better education. We feel that we all need a nudge in the right direction to do what we should be doing, which is using reusable bags. We keep saying bags, but really it doesn't have to be a bag. You can think about other things that you might want to take to the grocery store. Like I know people who ride their bikes, they use those milk crates on the back of their bicycle, and so they could take those in the store and pack their groceries in one of those. So really it can be any kind of container that you want to use. It doesn't have to be a bag. Oh, and I did want to mention that for the people who are using plastic bags today, that it is far better to take them back for recycling, even though we've talked about some issues with recycling. It is far better to take the bags back for recycling than it is to put them in your trash and let them go to the landfill, or for people who live outside of town, I know sometimes they burn them. So both of those things are worse than taking them back to the grocery store to be recycled. So if you are using plastic bags, please do recycle them. Okay, and this is another clip from the movie, and I do want to mention that this is from the movie Bag It, and this is the last clip that we'll see from the film tonight. But if this has intrigued any of you that you would like to see the full movie, we will be offering another free showing of the movie on February 19th here in downtown Columbia. And there's some flyers on the table in the back with the logistics for that. So just wanted to mention that in case anyone wants to see the entire movie. And so what this clip is going to show us is some more thoughts about recycling and plastic bag pollution. And then I also want to mention, if you would, to pay attention when we get to the part where it's talking about the different numbers, plastics 1, 2, 3, 4. It also will include on that the recycling rates related to each of those different kind of plastics. So that's something that's worth noting.
I spent a lot of time in my book asking, is recycling doing any good? Is it worthwhile? Should we continue to do it? And the short answer is a resounding yes, yes, yes. It saves enormous amounts of energy to make new goods from old goods instead of continually pulling raw materials from the earth and transforming them, transporting them, and then sending them on this one-way trip to the landfill. For every barrel of waste we put on the curb, there are 71 barrels of waste generated upstream in making all these consumer goods. And every time we recycle whatever we can, we're chipping away at those 71 barrels upstream.
This stuff isn't recyclable.
That's recyclable.
No, it's not.
That's recyclable.
No, it's not.
You put it all in and they'll figure it out. There's the thing again. See? Recycle. Why would they put that on if you can't recycle it?
Right. Okay.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Shouldn't be carrying stuff.
No, I shouldn't. Should I?
No, you shouldn't.
I truly believe people are recycling because I think it's the right thing to do. As soon as they get rid of it into that container, they never think about it anymore. I don't even think they know where it goes after it leaves our site. I don't know where it goes after it leaves this site. I think it could be a feel-good thing for people.
I have such a love-hate relationship with recycling because I love recycling in that it's sort of an on-ramp or a gateway drug to bigger, better environmental activism. But what I hate about it is it lulls people into thinking they're making a difference. You know, you buy this thing, you know it's overpackaged, but at least you can recycle it. You put it in that blue bin and it's like, ah.
This is recycling arrows.
Yeah, chasing arrow.
Yeah, it's a chasing arrow.
Yeah.
So most people would assume that means, hey, I can recycle that.
Yeah, that was brilliant marketing on the American Chemistry Council and American Plastic Council's part. But they use that chasing arrow to make us all think that it's all recyclable.
Turns out there's no regulation with the recycling symbol. We've been duped into believing that all these products are getting recycled.
The truth is that really only a few of those numbers, 1 and 2, are highly recycled. Those other numbers are going straight to the landfill or the incinerator.
Okay, I've seen these numbers on the bottom of plastic before, and I always wondered what they meant. And now, the Society of Plastics Industry Coding System. Number 1, polyethylene terephthalate. Number 2, high-density polyethylene. Number 3, polyvinyl chloride. Number 4, low-density polyethylene. Number 5, polypropylene. Number 6, polystyrene. And number 7, other.
Okay, so let's continue on with our look at some of the common objections to a plastic bag ordinance. One of the other points that sometimes is brought up is that single-use plastic bags generate fewer greenhouse gas emissions than paper or reusable bags, and I certainly am all for lowering our carbon footprints, but this is a really complex question that's not easy to answer, and so I have some of my props here. So this is the kind of bag that we're talking about in terms of a single-use plastic bag. And you can see it's lightweight. And then here is a reusable bag that's a lot heavier, holds a lot more, made of cotton. Here's another kind that's, made of some kind of poly something. It's reusable. Not quite as sturdy as my cotton bag, but, gets the job done and can be reused many, many times. And One thing I would like to point out too is I've been using this bag for 15 years. So, if you get a nice sturdy bag, they will last a long time. And certainly the big point about greenhouse gas emissions with anything that we have in our life is you lower your carbon footprint the more you reuse something and avoid producing a new something. So whether it's a new bag or whether it's a new car or a new iPhone, the more you reuse and keep using what you already have or use something for a long time, the more you lower your carbon footprint. So the thing about this complex question about greenhouse gases is when you talk about bags and the different types of bags like I've just shown you, there's so many things you have to think about. You have to think about the raw materials that went into the bag. Where did the raw materials come from? Where did they have to go to be manufactured into a bag? Where is the bag manufactured? What kind of energy do they use in the country where it's manufactured? Do they use coal? Do they use natural gas? Do they have clean solar energy? The amount of weight in the bag itself, how much does the bag hold? How much does it cost in terms of greenhouse gas emissions to transfer that bag to the grocery store where it's going to be given out? What happens to that bag at the end of its life? Is it in a landfill? Is it recycled? Is it incinerated? So you can see that this question of greenhouse gas emissions is really a very complex one. So the point that we want to make is that greenhouse gas emissions is one of the many things that you have to think about when you're thinking about the environmental impact of plastic bags. As we've talked about, the others are litter in the landscape, litter in the stormwater systems and our water supply, the toxicity of these degraded food or plastic particles and them entering the human food chain, and of course the impact on wildlife and livestock. Another common objection is, and a lot of people that we've talked to, they tell me, well, I have a whole bunch of these bags. I can just never remember to take them to the grocery store with me. And so we've talked to people about, well, how do you remember to take your bags to the store, especially when you're developing this as a new habit? And I know one of the things I did was to actually, as soon as I would unload them, I would put them back in the car. And I would put them in an obvious spot in the car so that when I got out of the car, I would remember to take them into the grocery store. So I would say if you're trying to develop a new habit, that's a great way to start. Another really effective method is if you're a person who uses a shopping list, write take bags on your shopping list. And then when you're doing your final review of the shopping list before you head to the grocery store, you'll see that on there and it will help you remember to pick up your bags and to take them into the store with you. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention was that the other thing that I do, because I'm not always a planner, so sometimes I spontaneously stop at the grocery store, and is I carry one of these in my purse. And this is a small compact bag. There's a lot of different types of these that you can get. They have clips to hook on your purse or your backpack. And this little bag is very lightweight, fits in my purse, but yet it opens up to a full-size shopping bag. So with that kind of bag, you can always have your bag handy and you won't have to get a plastic bag or a paper bag. Another thing that people ask about is the cost of paper bags for the retailers. So if we would put an ordinance in place like this, it might initially increase the amount of paper bags that people are using. And it's true, paper bags do cost the retailer more than a plastic bag. A paper bag costs like 6 cents each, and a plastic bag, those lightweight ones, cost like 2 cents a piece. And so one of the reasons in the ordinance that there's a fee on paper bags is, one, to discourage use so that you will actually think about bringing your reusable bags, but the other is to compensate the store for the paper bags. And the way the ordinance is written, the store will be retaining that fee, and it's a little higher than their cost, but that will also help them cover any bags that they give out for the low-income customers who are on WIC or SNAP or whatever food programs are approved. And then there was an article in the paper about it was an op-ed editorial where it was mentioned that in some cities they feel like that the plastic bag ordinances have reduced retail sales or driven them outside of city limits. Well, I have a couple of points on that. Is one, we actually have a couple of grocery stores in the city today that don't give out any type of bag. And they are within the city limits. They compete with the stores that give out plastic bags, and they do just fine. They stay in business. And so if you're not familiar with those are Aldi's and the Natural Grocer, and there may be others, but those are the two I'm familiar with. So that's one thing, is that competition today in that area is not driving any stores out of business. They're not losing sales because they don't have plastic bags. The other thing is that the way the city of Columbia's geography is that the grocery stores happen to be within the city limits. And even though we are surrounded by smaller communities that have grocery stores, none of them are just like 1 or 2 miles outside of town. You'd have to drive much further to get to one of these other stores. And so I would be surprised if somebody would spend the gas to drive that many miles to get to a store to avoid either paying 10 cents for a paper bag or just bringing their own. So that's one. So that's one of the points there. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier about paper bag fees being difficult for the poor. And the ordinance does include an exemption for people on approved food stamp programs like SNAP or WIC. And so those people would be exempt from the 10-cent fee if they didn't want to bring their own bags. And the other thing I wanted to mention, in case you're not familiar with it today, and one way to reduce your grocery bill is that there's a lot of stores in town that give you a credit for bringing your own bag. So if you'd like to reduce your grocery bill today, one way to do that is to start bringing your own bags, whether they're paper, plastic, or reusable, of other forms, and get a 5-cent credit for every bag that you bring. Some people think bag fees are a tax, and that the way the ordinance is written in Columbia, they are not a tax. The fee is a fee for purchasing a paper bag, and that 10 cents would remain with the grocer and not be transferred to any government entity. So that means it's not a tax. Another point that people make is that the government should not take away our choices as consumers. And of course, we in the United States are used to a lot of choices as consumers. And this is one of those complex, really big picture kind of questions. But I think we have a history in this country where we've seen that it's important when we're trying to make a transition to something for the public good, that sometimes we need an ordinance or a law to push us in the right direction. So we have a lot of examples of this, even though it's well known that wearing a seatbelt saves lives. There's still many people who don't do it, and that's why there's a law to tell them that they have to wear a seatbelt. And even though children are the most precious thing in the life of almost any parent, we still have to have a law that tells parents that you have to put your child in a car safety seat. And that is for the most precious resource in their life, which is their child. So, and we've had, over the history, we've had to have laws to protect our water from pollutants, not only from corporations, but from individuals, and to protect our clean air, to keep it from being, a garbage dump. So we have a long history where ordinances are necessary to protect the common good. Yes, it may take away a choice from us as a consumer, but unfortunately, we aren't able to educate every consumer with the kind of facts that you all are learning here tonight. And so that's why ordinances help people make the right choice when it comes to protecting the public good and the common good for our health and welfare. The other thing that I wanted to mention is convenience. Us as citizens of the United States, we're all about convenience for the most part. We are very used to having things very conveniently. And so convenience, unfortunately, though, sometimes can breed bad habits. And so that's what plastic bags at grocery stores are. They really are just a bad habit. And another problem that they talked about in the recycling video clip is really the out of sight, out of mind. That once, you get that plastic bag and you throw it in your trash can, then it gets hauled away on your trash pickup day, and you never have to see it again. But that doesn't mean that it still isn't costing something for us as citizens to have that trash bag in the city landfill or in the environment. Okay, so another question, and we're going to transition now from objections to frequently asked questions. So one of the questions people ask is, will stores still offer recycling of bags at the stores? And we anticipate that they will. It will be up to the stores. There's nothing in the ordinance that says they have to. But the stores primarily do this for multiple reasons. They offer recycling today, one, as a customer satisfaction issue for those of us that care about recycling. They do it to keep us happy. They also do it because when they sell those bags to a plastic bag recycler, they get paid for them. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps a grocery store with their bottom line. And then the other reason is because we will still have all of these kind of bags, these produce, bulk food bags, and bags that you can put your chicken in. There will still be a need for returning bags to the store. And I do want to mention, in case you aren't aware, that most of the stores take not only bags that say number 2 on them, but they also take bags that say number 4 on them. So if you have like a bread bag that has number 4 on it, you can also take that back to your grocery store, just to educate a little more on the recycling. So we do anticipate that recycling at stores will continue. And we've talked a little bit about those incentives. A lot of stores offer you a nickel per bag that you bring. We anticipate the stores will continue to offer those as well. There's nothing in the ordinance that requires them to, but one of the stores, the manager told me that they would definitely continue to offer theirs. So for the sake of competition, I think the others will continue to as well. So what about stores that don't offer paper bags today? Will they be forced to start carrying them? And the answer is resounding no. So those few stores that I mentioned earlier that don't have any type of bag in their store, they will not be required to carry a paper bag as a result of the ordinance. And then a lot of people are interested in, will I still be able to have something to put my chicken or my raw meat in? And the answer is yes. The stores will probably make those bags available back in the meat section because they won't be able to offer a plastic bag at checkout. So you'll need to put your poultry or whatever in a bag back in the meat section, which is actually better because then it keeps it from contaminating your grocery cart and anything else that's in there. So if you want to put your meat in a bag, then it's actually better to do it back in the meat section. So you will still be able to use a bag for that purpose. The ordinance allows an exemption for sanitation, as Jan mentioned earlier. Another question is, isn't it worse to use paper bags because we need to protect our forest? And I certainly do wholeheartedly support protecting our forest. And the purpose of the ordinance really is to reduce litter and to drive a transformation of a small lifestyle change to using reusable bags. And you can reuse your paper bags that you may have stacked up at home or your plastic bags. But the purpose really is not to get people to shift from plastic to paper. The purpose really is to use something else. Why not ban plastic bags in all stores? Some cities have certainly done this as a way to really get a grip on their problems. We felt that it would be an easier lifestyle change for people to start with the grocery stores, pharmacies, and convenience stores, because those are the major source of plastic bags in our community. When you go to the grocery store, frequently, if you're shopping for a week, you're going to walk out with several of these plastic bags. Whereas if you go to the clothing store, you probably only walk out with one. So that was kind of our thinking, is to go where the bulk of the bags are being distributed and start with that. And then as a community, if we like it, then we can expand it to include other plastic bags. The next question is, why not charge a fee for plastic bags? And that was mentioned in the video as something that worked in Ireland. But they have a pretty steep fee on their plastic bags. And so we looked at, the commission looked at some of the cities in the United States that have implemented fees and found that initially it did help to cut down on the number of plastic bags being used, but that over time people adjusted to the fee and the idea, and they just started paying the fee and taking as many plastic bags as before. Additionally, it doesn't solve the problem with litter or the other problems with plastic in the environment. So that was one of the reasons that we did not recommend a plastic bag fee here in Columbia. Okay, and then our final question is, why not switch from biodegradable to compostable or compostable bags? So using biodegradable or compostable instead of the standard number 2 plastic that most of them use. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, a lot of biodegradable bags that are labeled that way It's because it's the same number 2 kind of plastic bag, but they've applied a chemical agent to it to make it break down even faster into those little particle bits. So those little plastic particles. So that's not something that we really want. We don't want those plastic particles. The other is like for compostable bags. Now those are actually organic biodegradable bags that can be composted. The challenge with those is though they have to be composted under ideal conditions. So if any of you are backyard composters, which I am, you put one of those in your compost bin, which I know mine is never ideal, and you know a year later I still have the same bag in there because it didn't get hot enough to break it down. So really those need to be composted in a commercial composting environment, which Columbia does have places where you can take stuff to be composted, but we don't have curbside pickup of compostable items like for composting. So we didn't feel like that was a good choice. Compostable bags actually cost quite a bit more for the retailer as well, so they would not be very happy if we asked them to make that switch. And one of the other challenges is it would be difficult for the retailers to make sure they were buying the right kind of bags because there is, I guess, kind of confusing choices out there in the marketplace on what's biodegradable because it's got this agent applied to it and what's biodegradable compostable. So it's kind of just better, since there aren't really that many advantages to it, they don't promote reuse, they still create litter, to go ahead and not switch to compostables. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Larry because we're ready for the next part of the agenda.
Okay, next we'll hear a couple of words from Dr. Frederick vom Saal, who's at the University of Missouri and has for a long time studied the environmental fate of plastics as they move through the waste stream.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. My expertise is in the health effects of chemicals used in various types of plastics. And one of the issues that was raised is that, I was sent an email from the chemical industry that basically said, well, this is BPA free, and therefore we don't need to worry about it. One of the important things to realize about plastics is that we don't have chemical regulations in this country that allow for a rational replacement of one chemical with another. For instance, we just published a paper that BPA in thermal paper is being replaced by a chemical called BPS, a similar chemical, and it's even worse than BPA. But it's legal because there are no testing requirements or anything. So to say something is safe because it's BPA free is really giving people an illusion of safety. So with regard to the ethylene plastics that are used in plastic bags, instead of just reiterating comments that are made here, I thought that I would read from an article that was recently published in the journal Nature that addressed exactly this issue. And the title of this is Classify Plastic Waste as Hazardous. And again, Nature is the premier scientific journal in the world. And what they basically say is the monomers making up some plastics, such as polyethylene, which are used to make plastic bags, which is the subject of this evening, used to be thought to be benign. Yet these materials still become toxic because they pick up other pollutants, and the other pollutants have been mentioned, are such as DDT, which is still present in high levels in the ocean, polychlorinated biphenyls that were used as flame retardants, dioxin, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are carcinogenic. And what happens is, and it says here, these ethylene-based fragments pick up these pollutants and bring them into the food chain at approximately 1 million times higher concentration than would be in the water without these fragments. And one of the things this article points out is that of all of the different types of plastics, and you just saw the 1 through 7 recycling code story, that ethylene is the most photodegradable plastic made. And so the ethylene-based plastic bags are going to be the most subject to UV degradation and end up with what we referred to as becoming microparticles. This is a very slow process, and we really don't know what the total lifespan is, other than that it's clearly hundreds of years as these very gradually photodegrade into these microparticles. And it's really because we're dealing with a product that's produced at 500 billion a year or so, that even though there's a very slow degradation, it still results in a huge amount of this toxic material out there that as it moves through the food chain in these microparticles, the microparticles being ethylene-based, it's an extremely reactive little molecule. And there's this process of absorption of the chemicals onto the ethylene in the water. And then a whole series of articles have been published on the rates of desorption once it gets into the body of the organism and then these are lipophilic or fat-loving compounds, all of these persistent organic pollutants that are attached to the ethylene, and they get embedded in the fat of the organism. And then the next level of organism in the food chain consumes that organism that has much higher concentrations of these chemicals than would normally be the case. And that gets biomagnified through the food chain. And by the time we eat organisms, fish, at the top of the food chain, we are consuming much higher levels of pollutants because of that. As adults, these pollutants are related to cancers, brain damage, things like dementia and cognitive loss with aging, reproductive damage. But the real threat is to what I focused my career on, fetal development, infants, children, adolescents, during phases of development where you have these chemicals seriously deranging every aspect of the body. So there is a generational impact here because the damage to your child is then transmitted also to your grandchildren. So there really are health effects associated with the kinds of plastic that are used in these plastic bags. I'm happy to share this article, and I shared with the Columbia City Council articles from a journal issue of the Proceedings of the Royal Society, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, that from a meeting that I ran a number of years ago, exactly on the issue of global plastic pollution, and sent them a number of those articles. If people are interested in them, I have them all of these in PDF format. I can email them to you so that you can actually see the original scientific literature that supports the statements that I've made, which as an academic I would not make a statement that isn't absolutely supported by the science. And I am happy to answer any kind of questions that anyone would have on this subject. Yes.
Wait, quick question. We're recording, and if you guys are fine with coming up to the microphone, Lawrence. Sorry.
Thank you.
Val DeBrunce, I live at 6302 Upper Bridle Bend Drive in Columbia. I'm a relatively new resident. The articles you just described, I'd like your email address.
I have a card with me. I'll give that to you at the end of the meeting. And I have many cards.
We will try to post the articles that you're referring to along with the minutes of this meeting on the city website, as long as we can do that without violating some kind of copyright or something. We'll look into that and try to make sure that that happens.
I'm a chemist by training. I would still like this gentleman's email address.
Sure.
Fine. Happy. We do a lot of analytical chemistry, so I'm happy to talk to you about that. Anyone else? Again, I'm happy to give you my card, and you can contact me later with questions. I'm always happy to interact with the public about the research that's funded with federal tax dollars by the National Institutes of Health. So I consider this part of my job, returning that information to the public. So thank you.
So now what we're going to do is open up the floor to statements or questions from the general public. We would ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes, as is usual in these sorts of meetings. We also ask that you state your name and your address, and that you use the microphone. Our city staff over here will be operating the timer. And if you have questions for the people with some expertise in the room, we will try to address them. Either Dr. Famsal or city staff may be able to answer some of the questions, or we may be able to. So go ahead and line up behind the microphone, and let's hear from the public.
Hi, Donna Kessel, 715 Lion Street. I have a procedural question. What about like Target and Walmart, who have groceries, but I also have, clothing. So if I buy shoes or a blouse at Walmart or Target, what happens?
If they sell perishable food, they can't give out plastic bags. If they also sell clothing, well, they can't give out plastic bags.
Christine Dorr, 2510 Brookside Court. Are the grocery stores on board with this? And the other stores that sell perishable food?
We have spoken, we have reached out to a number of grocery stores in particular, talked to the managers. We have talked to a number of retailers, large and small, to try to gauge their attitude toward this idea. And that was actually my first question when we started looking into this issue: what's the impact on stores? And in all the cases that we could find, the managers were like, meh, we're not really totally happy about this, but we're not going to fight it. It's not a big deal for us. We can give out paper bags. It's really not that much different. I'm sure we may hear from them tonight, and I encourage them, if they're here, to stand up and correct me if I'm wrong. But that was what we found when we reached out to stores.
I know that I've run into a little resistance by the checkers or the baggers with my cloth bags, but a simple solution is like that little plastic cutting board that you can buy, the cheap little things you get for freebies, and you just fold it into your bag and it pops it open, and it's very easy. And thank you.
My name is Roger Freeze. I live at 3512 Hedgewood here in Columbia. And I've been reading some on this, and the estimates that I've seen is that these plastic bags make up about 1 to 2% of the total trash flow that the city takes into the dump. That's not very much. when you consider that I'm aware of trash that comes all the way to this city dump from 50 miles away in Versailles, Missouri. My point I'm making is I think we're just sparring at windmills doing this strictly in Columbia. If we want to do it, let's do it on a statewide basis. Next point I'd like to make is I've spent many really nice Sunday afternoons floating down the Missouri River, and I don't like to see the trash. But I think you folks would be a whole lot better off and spend your time more wisely if you would go after the littering people, the people that throw their trash out their cars or trucks or whatever, and that's where the trash comes from. I just cannot see the little bit of trash that's going to be saved from this program is far outweighed by the inconvenience it's going to cause for the people that are used to using the plastic bags. And I'm very strongly against it. I think it's another case of the nanny state telling me what to do, how to live my life. And I'm just getting pretty darn sick of that. So that's all I have to say. If you'd like to ask me a question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Thank you very much.
I'm Beverly Fries, 3512 Hedgewood Drive, Columbia. I am very much in favor of education. I think an education program directed at the public on these issues that are caused from the littering would be a wonderful thing. I remember growing up hearing about litter bugs and how awful they were, and that made me want to pick up my trash. I don't know what kind of a program could be come up with at this point, to make it new and fresh. But I think we do need to educate the public, and I feel quite capable of educating myself and making my own decision about what's right and wrong in this issue. I carry a lot of cloth bags in my car, but I don't appreciate the idea that I should be nudged to make what somebody else thinks is the right decision for me. And I feel strongly enough about it that I actually would travel to another community and spend my grocery dollars there, somewhere where they have the freedom to choose what they want. I resent having this type of choice taken away.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Stino. I live at 5212 Claybrook Court. I moved there this past December 18th. And I was very glad to do so because I left Columbia 9 years ago. And while I was gone, I worked for Jefferson County's Solid Waste and Recycling Division for 8.25 years. I thought I'd be talking to the choir here, but perhaps not. In any case, one point that I'd like to make, I came primarily because of Dr. Von Saul. I mean, when I heard he was going to be here, I said, I've got to go. You made a mention about a habit. I happen to know from listening to NPR that a habit is established after 21 consecutive doings of it, okay? So the other thing is, Ms. Fries, you can read about a lot of things and gain knowledge. However, experience sometimes is the only way you can truly know it, like having a child or losing a child, as I have done. I was fascinated to learn when I started recycling how much I was actually throwing away prior to adopting a recycling attitude. I actually recycle more bulk than I do in actual trash. I want to thank all of you on the committee. I encourage us all to realize that we are connected in every way to this earth. And I would just urge everyone to be compassionate and care for the earth as much as they would their own being, because in essence it's the same thing. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Although I appreciate this person's comments as much as you do, I would ask you to hold applause just in the interest of time. Thank you.
Ken Medkiff, 1005 Bellevue Court in Columbia, and in full, admission, I am a member of the Environment and Energy Commission, but I'm not speaking on that. I am a member of a stream team. And I've been a member of a stream team for 20 years, and my territory is from Stadium Boulevard down to the confluence with the Hinkson on Flat Branch. By actual count, plastic bags are the #1 litter item from in Flat Branch, from Stadium Boulevard down to the confluence of Hinkson. So I'm very curious to know how you determined that plastic bags were not the #1 item in streams in Columbia, because by volume they're not much, but by number they're a lot, because plastic bags are everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And I fully support this. I voted for it, and I will continue to do it, both as a stream team member and as a member of the Environment and Energy Commission. Thank you.
To answer that, the information we got from the city staff was in litter pickups that they were involved in. Their count was the plastic bag was the #3 item.
My name is Dean Anderson from 814 Timbers Court, and for several years I was coordinator of the Community Stormwater Project, and I too cleaned up many streams in this town. Most of the watersheds I've done stream cleanups in, and I can't tell you the number of plastic bags that I've seen in the streams. Many of them are impounded in the banks, they're wrapped around the roots of trees, they're entangled in mats, in log jams, and they really do degrade the stream quite significantly. I think that if we want to show that we respect the environment and want to do what we can to help protect the environment that really increases the quality of life for all of us, this is a good idea and something that we should do. As a member of Columbia, I've lived here for 30 years. I'm very proud to live in this community because I think we are good at setting examples to the rest of the state about how to solve problems that degrade the life for all of us. If this were to pass, I would be proud to live in a community that would promote respect for the environment by increasing awareness by passing a policy like this, not only because of the symbol that it shows to everybody else, but also because of the fact that it's also taking an action. I think education is an important thing, but we know from education that it doesn't have the same impact as policy change. We see that time and time again, that education doesn't necessarily result in behavior change, but policy does. And I think a policy like this helps promote good change that results in better stewardship of our environment and really promotes a better life for everybody who's within the community and enjoys the natural resources that promote intrinsic value for all of us. So I definitely support this. I'm very proud of those of you who have worked hard to make this, bring this to the public, and I encourage you to continue your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Melanie. Did you say that plastic bottles were the largest, was the most common trash found in the Missouri River?
Yes, that's definitely true.
Well, if that's true, then why aren't we attacking the plastic bottles instead of plastic bags?
Well, that's a really great question. I can only speak from experience working on the Missouri River, and the reason we find plastic bottles is because they float easily and they accumulate. Most of the time, we're not even cleaning up the floating items like I showed in the pictures, but we're actually dropping off volunteers and working along the banks. And there's just huge amounts of these floating items. And when we're on the Missouri River, the plastic bags are really already torn up into shreds. A lot of them are just wrapped around willow banks. So I can only, speak with that direct experience of what we've seen on the Missouri River as being the number one item. But it's a huge issue. I mean, you've seen how many countries and states and cities are promoting this kind of an ordinance. And I have yet to hear about banning plastic bottles, something that...
Okay, is that the thing that we're going to attack next? Is the plastic bottles?
I really can't tell.
We would like to. And then I have a question for the doctor here. Did you say that it has been proven that these biochemicals in plastic are causing dementia? Would you clarify that, please?
Yes, actually, there are a whole series of chemicals in plastics that are what are called neurotoxic and actually interfere with the ability of neurons to connect with each other. And in exposure studies, what you find is the brains looking like, even in young individuals exposed to these chemicals, their brains look like brains of very old people with dementia, because what's happening is the hormonal signals that control the ability of neurons to connect to each other and communicate are disrupted, and that's a kind of outcome that is seen in dementia, and that's caused by chemicals that are in plastic.
If that is true, don't you think the federal government would have been involved and shut down all the plastics materials, all the plastic factories?
One of the critical issues in the United States that distinguishes us from Europe is that in Europe now, chemicals are being tested under a new legislation that was passed about 6 years ago called REACH, so that a chemical in commerce has to be tested for health effects. In the United States, when all chemical legislation was passed, about 60,000 chemicals were in commerce, and every single one of them, and practically all the chemicals we're talking about would be included in that 60,000, are still in commerce, and they're completely exempt from any federal regulation and untouchable by any federal regulatory agency. The only way these chemicals are being regulated is that cities and states and counties are regulating them, because it's not within federal government's legal ability to regulate any of the chemicals we're talking about. Our federal legislation precludes the FDA and EPA from regulating these chemicals. They have no authority to do that.
Thank you. Well, I do all that I can in recycling, and I urge all my tenants to. And I just do not think that, I'm just against the plastic bag ban. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Ruthie Macha, and I live at 608 South Greenwood, and this is my 23rd year in Columbia after moving back and forth a little bit when I was younger. Columbia has always been a progressive kind of town to me, and I don't know if we're still able to be thought of that way, but we've always seemed to take care of the health of our people and the zoning of the land, all these things we've been concerned about. somehow we don't realize about this plastic chemical danger. I'm a cancer survivor, and my tumor was estrogen receptive. Estrogen is something that is leached from plastic into water or anything else that you eat or drink from it. I don't eat out of plastic. I don't drink out of plastic. I don't really want plastic in my water. So when I feel very strongly about it, and I do my part. I recycle everything I can. I try to have others recycle. Sometimes it's a little bit of a war. I pick up trash on the streets. I walk my dog. I take an extra bag or just his bag, the bag I have for his waste. And I always come home, just if I walk a block or around the block, I always come home with this much trash in a bag. And I only pick up plastic. I will sometimes pick up a smashed can or metal, paper. I look for plastic, little chips of plastic. I think a fish will eat that, a bird will eat that. And I do this, and I feel good about it. I want to live longer. I don't want dementia. I don't want another round with cancer. You may not like the idea of not being able to have a plastic bag, but it might be better for your health. I do like fish. I rarely buy fish anymore, I'm afraid, because the fish are eating the plastic. And I don't know if you really listened to that part about the plastic chemicals coming into the fat of the animal. This is where it is not water soluble, it's fat soluble or whatever it is, it's not even soluble. And so it is coming up the food chain. So if we do this, it will be for ourselves. And I do think that's where we have to start, is protecting ourselves. We can't sit back like children and say the government will do it, the teacher will do it, the politicians will do it, because they're not doing it. So, wow, 1 second, that's great.
Thank you.
I'm Dick Parker. I live at 215 West Sexton. A number of years ago, I ran a study of trash on roadsides, and we looked at the number of items, the weight of items, and the surface area of items. The number one item was cigarette butts. They were not high on the surface area list. The major item on surface area was bags. They were not high on the weight list. The number one item on the weight list was car parts, tires, and pieces of metal. When industry speaks about this, they always pick the nice one. Plastic bags weigh hardly anything. They make up only a couple of % of the waste going in, actually a couple of tenths of % of the waste going into the landfill. That's because they are very light individually. They appear along streams and such as the major item. If you pick your numbers well, you can say lots of things.
Thank you.
Eugene Elkin, 3406 Range Line here in the city. I go back some 30 plus years as a heavy recycler. I do not recall at this time what was the incentive to push, but I can only credit Channel 8 as being the primary channel that I would have watched. And as the years went by, Paul Pepper was the educator. So as the people have spoken this evening, we have got to get on board with what is education. For we are in a room, as Miss Barbara Buffalo will tell us, in a totally recycled environment. And you need to see the countertop with the broken glass in it. That appears at the front of the room, as well as the many other things that she can explain on her tours. Give you that credit, Barbara. And the reason I mention this is I mentioned the other night that I hope to bring Habitat here as a form of recycling. I heard this morning on the radio, wardrobe is a form of recycling, as that's clothing for the needy. We need to understand the money that you will gain if you do recycle. I am not in favor of the way you're going at this. My thoughts are maybe 2 to 3 bags currently, with complete phase out over 5 years. And at that time, the purpose of dragging it out is learning new habits, as this gentleman said here. I'm very upset not to see or have any knowledge after 30 plus years for the new gentleman in the room that recycling these bags, I've never known to recycle those bags. We are getting less and less quality of those bags. Our manufacturer are making them thinner and thinner, which is causing me to throw them away, which is a complete waste of utilities as well as the customer's time. Can't be recycled in my eyes, but if they can be by someone else, that needs to be done. I'm trying to recall what else. I'm about to lose my voice. The fact that in Boone County, I do not know if this no longer exists, but when the lady speaks of her cancer, we have a very large polluter here, which can affect reproductive areas of the male body as well. It could be the female. I do not know the full facts, but I'm saying that things of the past can come to haunt us in our future. And you are going down the right track. I just don't like the fast cut it off now, because I'm hearing it in the crowd. We want the new guy on the block to learn how to recycle, as well as the old one to know where things are after 30-some years. I never seen them barrels before. I look at the screen and go, how come I don't know that? I should be able to tell that to others. As new information in 4 seconds, your plastic bag, a bottle with a neck will pay you nickel at Brown Station Recycling, Civic Recycling, and your current cans will bring you 60 cents a pound. Please, please put the word out. That's education.
Thank you.
I guess I'm short. My name is Sandy Gumersheimer. I live at 100 South Glenwood here in Columbia, and I would like to speak up about the fact that I think this is a very important topic, and I wholeheartedly, with every ounce of my being, applaud all of you for doing this. I think this is important. I think that if it's an inconvenience, then you need to figure out a way to deal with it. And I organized a group of us in our neighborhood in the Old Southwest area to take our plastics to Millersburg, because the city did not recycle any more than 1s and 2s, which I applaud the city for doing that and expanding the plastics that you take in. But also there is education, because people just consider throwing everything in the plastic or the blue bags. They don't think about, like everyone said, where that goes afterwards, or that somebody has to sort through that because it goes into the landfill because they're not recycling it. I have a friend who told me the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, which is she doesn't recycle because she doesn't have children and she doesn't care what happens to the universe. So if you're self-centered and you don't want to go out of your way at all to make this a better place to live, or just as a whole, the United States, then you need to reassess your values.
Thank you.
Alice Turner, do I give my address? 1204 Fieldcrest, and I am a member of the Energy Environment Commission, but I'm just speaking as a Columbia resident of 30 years. I wanted to recount a story. I first found out about these plastic I don't like to call it a plastic ban because there is plenty of plastic that we're going to have at the grocery store, those sturdier bags that don't decompose quite so easily. But this story is about going home to visit my 93-year-old mother in Maryland. And I was driving her to a grocery store. She's finally stopped driving. No, turn around. We have to go back home. Well, why do we have to go back home? I forgot my bag. So we go back home. She opens her closet full of 200 plastic bags and maybe 100 paper bags too. And she pulls out one of those plastic bags, one of these light little plastic bags. We get back in the car. We go to the store. She buys groceries. She puts her groceries in there. She didn't complain that there was a fee on buying these bags. She just wanted to make sure she brought hers so she wouldn't have to pay for it. And I know there are thousands of people in Columbia, I have a few of my own, that have plastic bags as well as maybe these sturdier canvas bags that they will bring to the store when we pass this. So that was my first introduction to this. Then I went go a little more globally. We saw the map of the world. This weekend, I went to the festival that the Peace Corps volunteers had done, and I asked people, I had that petition, would you support a plastic bag ban in Columbia? And someone grabbed the clipboard from me. She goes, I am from Rwanda. My whole country has gotten rid of these plastic bags. My whole country, let me sign that. And I was like, wow, that just brought it home to me. She lives here. This is very normal to her. It's causing problems. And when we saw that list of China, Taiwan, Rwanda, Bangladesh, I can't name all the countries, they are dealing with some of their stormwater problems. They are dealing with their flooding. I have a friend who's from Bangladesh. He said in the city of 9 million where he lived, they enacted this, well, actually in the whole country, and it decreased their flooding because they weren't covering their storm sewers. This is something that I would love to see in Columbia because it's only going to help us keep down our costs of government, help us have a better Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Nichols. I live at 511 Hickman Avenue. I'm an environmental scientist. I've been working in that profession for at least 5 or so years. I spend a lot of time working in streams and forests. And just one thing that I would like to point out is that what makes plastic bags so uniquely pernicious as an environmental risk is how mobile they are, more so than plastic bottles or any other type of material, because they're so easily carried by the wind and by the water because of how light they are. I've been in all kinds of forests in Missouri, Virginia, West Virginia, and no matter where you are, you can be miles from a road or from a town or anything, and you can find plastic bags everywhere because they've been carried there by the wind. And also, I think that they should be considered a hazardous substance, and it's a failure of the federal and state governments to regulate them, and probably a success of the plastics lobbying industry. But one little story I'd like to say is that I was a grad student at the University of Missouri. I did research studying Hinkson Creek water quality, and we have a gauging station on Rogers Road, just north of the city's landfill, and I used to visit that site at least 3 times a week, every week for 2 years. And any day that I was out there, if the wind was particularly high, you could see a whole stream of plastic bags coming from the landfill. They're everywhere. They're lined up against the fence. They're in the trees. It's really bad. I have pictures I'd be willing to share if anybody would like to see them. So it just seems that our landfill has failed to contain them adequately. If we're only recycling 12% of them, then we're failing to capture them that way. It just seems that we as a society have completely failed to regulate this, either from the source of the plastics industry or from the end point. And as I say, I work a lot in streams. Those bags, wherever they're coming from, when they find their way into the water, they stop they become heavy, waterlogged, and they start moving downstream. And Hingston Creek is a particularly flashy stream. When it rains, the water comes up real fast and then it goes back down. And one of the most reliable ways to tell how high the water got last night was to see where the plastic bags are caught up in the trees all along the creek. So I think that, America is a representative democracy. It's in our culture to start from the bottom up. So we as a small community, by raising our voice and banning plastic bags, we're contributing to the larger conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy Browning. I live at 2235 Bluff Boulevard in Columbia, and I've lived in the Columbia area since the late 70s. I've been working with the Sierra Club on this ordinance, and I'd like to speak just as a person who has been changed just by my work over the last approximately 6 to 8 months. I have always recycled back when you used to be able to take your beer cans up to Coors and recycle those things. But, so recycling is part of me, but I hadn't been as good with plastic bags. I would sometimes remember my bags and sometimes not, and not really worry. Now, just my consciousness, just in the past 6 to 8 months, if I go into Kohl's, I'll say, oh, I don't need a bag for that, or I'll bring in my bag. It really does not take that long for you to change the culture of your mind, to do something that's relatively easy. And yes, I know this may not be something that everybody wants to do, but that's why we have government. I believe in government as a power for good, and I'm really proud to live in the city of Columbia where we can actually do something. And maybe we can't do everything, and yes, sure, it would be great if we got rid of all the plastic bags and all the bottles and then the other plastic and whatever, and if that's where this grows to, that's wonderful. But we're starting relatively small with something relatively easy. Truly, you can come up with a bag, a box, or something, and go to the store and deal with it. And in the long run, it's going to be better. So when you're trying to decide, is it something you want to do or something you don't want to do, think, will it do more good or will it do more harm? It will do more good to not have these plastic bags, and it will be a very easy thing. We will pass an ordinance, and they will be gone. And it will help everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Sapp, 3405 Creasy Springs Road. I've been concerned about the environment for many, many years. I served on the very first citywide recycling committee. We recycled phone books. I was chair of the very first university-wide recycling committee, and I served on the committee that put together a long-term sustainability plan for the university. Reduce, reuse, and recycle have been my mantra for a long time. However, I oppose this ban. I think you're moving people toward a resource that is worse than the plastic bags. When you move them toward the paper bags that take more resources to produce, they're heavier and bulkier and they take more fuel to transport. And when they end up in our landfill, they produce more methane. I think that's an unexpected consequence that you should deal with. This is not the right thing to do. These bags are not one-use bags. You've already addressed many of the ways they're used, and you've suggested that people use other bags for picking up dog stuff or for lining waste baskets. I bet there are thousands of them in use all over Columbia that are being reused as trash can liners. There are many other ways that these bags are being reused. You can use them to recycle other things, such as taking books to the library as a donation, or taking clothes to thrift stores, or taking canned food or other items to the bins that Central Missouri Food Bank puts out. If you look in one of those bins, you'll see those bags are in there. There are hundreds of ways that these bags are used. And I urge you to leave it up to the good sense of the people in Columbia who do care about the environment to make their own decision, and don't legislate this for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred Vumsal. I live at 4679 South Bearfield, Columbia, and been a resident here and worked at the university for 35 years. And I think an important issue that was just raised is that you're moving from plastic to paper. But there are actually pretty good data from states that have imposed even a minor cost, such as 10 cents, on an item, and there has been a dramatic effect in terms of the proportion of people that come in and pay that. That something about that was raised before, but there are actually good data available that in fact people will not just go from plastic to paper, because the 10-cent fee will discourage that, and people will respond to that by actually greatly reducing the use of that as well as plastic being banned. So that is not a natural consequence of this law, that people will then start using paper as a replacement.
Thank you.
I might have a little time left. Christine Dorr, 2510 Brookside Court. I live on the Hingston behind Walmart, and people take their bags to the car full of groceries. But what's the explanation for all the bags behind that grocery store? It's phenomenal. And I think that we have, the gentleman just a little bit ago talked about the mobility of the plastic bags. The Missouri River, the large rivers, show a very different picture of the situation. And one of the biggest problems we have is we are not walking along the creek beds and walking along the skirts of the woods, most of us. We live in this town, we drive on the roads, we might be out on the big river or in the lake, but we don't see what's happening in the environment because we're not there. There are no trails that go along the Hingston Creek. We don't see it, we don't witness it. And it would only take, I promise you, it only takes a few times of forgetting your bags and you have to dump your loose groceries in the car before you start remembering. It's not that difficult, and it opens our mind up to the other responsibilities we have in this world. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is William Maxwell, 706 Fairview Avenue. I've been a resident of Columbia for 40 years. I think this ordinance is excellent. I think it should be stronger, actually, but we should take what we can get, hopefully. I think really want to thank Dr. Von Saal. He's done very important research. I want to address a couple of things opponents have said. The idea that paper bags are a worse environmental hazard than plastic bags, which leach neurotoxins, is entirely preposterous, in my opinion. But I think Professor Von Saal's research backs that up. A lot of the opponents like to talk about the nanny state. It's such an awful thing, the nanny state. Well, what about these 60,000 chemicals that have never been tested for safety and are not required or by law to be tested for safety or regulated in any way? Perhaps we need a little more of the nanny state, I would think. And I'm tired of people opposing reasonable safety and health and environmental regulations, invoking this metaphor of the nanny state. I'm sick of them disparaging nannies. You know, it's an admirable profession, you know. As far as education and litter enforcement being a better method to address this the problem of these plastic bags, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not one or the other. Of course we should do litter enforcement and education, but that's no reason to not do the reasonable policy of what this ordinance proposes. And plastic bottles are also a big problem, but that's no reason to not address in a reasonable and effective manner the problem of the plastic bags. I really am upset and bothered by cigarette butts. 98 out of 100 tobacco smokers throw them right on the ground, and there's no enforcement. And I've asked police officers before, why? I wish you would please enforce this. Wouldn't the word spread pretty quick if it's a $500 fine for littering, and maybe people would hear about that and they might stop throwing their cigarette butts down. The cops told me, well, we don't have the time for it. The prosecutor never has the time for it. It's a lost cause. So I think I wish they would, but there's only so many things the police and the prosecutor have time for. Well, that covers all my notes, I guess. Thank you for hearing me out. I really, really urge the council, city council, to pass this ordinance.
Thank you.
Aldebrun, 6302 Upper Bridle Bend Drive, Columbia, Missouri. I don't think there's any question that plastics were one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. However, we're just now seeing, if you will, the unforeseen consequences. Having said that, the presentation this evening, the first hour of the presentation, in my opinion, since we're here talking about plastic bags, single-use plastic bags, did a poor job of connecting the bag to the problem we saw in the video. We're talking about sizable pieces of colored plastic. We're talking about caps for bottles. None of that has anything to do with the single-use plastic bag. And I say all that to say, I think we're starting in the wrong place. I love the idea about cigarette butts. And last but not least, the gentleman who I think left the room here a little while ago said it best. We are a representative democracy. There are at least 2 city council people here. This regulation should be submitted to the voters and let them decide what they want. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gail Plemons, 17 Aldea. I am a member of the Stream Team. I pick up trash as a daily habit, just for fun. I thank the commission for your work, and I really would urge the city council to pass this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fred Nurnberger, 2005 Winfield Drive. I will say that we do recycle in my household. However, I am against this ban here, partly because I'm a little bit tired of the city council proposing or forcing their liberal agenda on the general people of Columbia. And as the gentleman over there just said, let the people vote on this thing instead of making it a city council decision. On the single-use plastic bags, I will say that a lot of people are saying that they take the bag and they're using them for other uses. Now you're saying we can buy those bags and still use them for the other uses. So I think what you're really doing is you're forcing the visible grocery sack underground, because the people are still going to be probably buying those same plastic bags to do their yard waste and dog waste and cat waste. And so you really haven't attacked the problem in reduction of the use of the plastic bag. So you're kind of going about this thing the wrong way. And I'll admit the grocery sacks, you know, they're an eyesore. Yes, they are out there. It's like the red car on the highway. Why do they always get pulled over? Because they're the most visible. That grocery sack is the most visible, so you're taking this as a target versus going after some other things that really should be dealt with. The bottle caps, and, you know, until this year, you know, we only recycled 2 plastics in Columbia. There were a lot of cities who did it otherwise. Did a lot more. We should have been doing that a long time ago. Now, I came here with an open mind. I wanted to be convinced that I should be on board with this. I think you guys did a poor job of selling that. I'm still not convinced with it. We have 173 communities throughout the U.S. that have already put in plastic bans. Why don't we have a case studies presented on what's happened in those communities? Have they seen the benefits? Right, they've been doing it. It's not just new for them. California's been one way or another in there for at least 5 years. There should be some data on that. Why aren't you presenting it? Well, why didn't you present it? You presented no data on any communities that have enacted these bans and what it's done. Okay, so you've done a poor job of convincing me, and I'm not convinced. I think you should let it to the voters. And if you can't convince the voters, then we just go on where we are.
Thank you. To address your question, we did look at some of the cities that had some of these bans. However, we chose not to put that in the presentation. We did find that some of them did have some positive effects, but your comments are appreciated. Thank you.
Excuse me, John Schultz, 1301 West Colchester Road. My family recycles. We use reusable bags, or we have plastic bags. We make use of them again. We use our paper bags as well. but I make sure all my trash goes, I'll go in my trash bag. It goes into the trash truck. I'm not the person out there throwing the Taco Bell bag out. That's a plastic bag. I'm not the person, littering throughout Columbia. We talked about the nanny state a couple speakers ago. Littering's illegal. That's not going to stop. We're not going to stop littering with this plastic bag ban. You're just going to punish people like me who make the right choices and don't, and care about the environment enough to recycle. I have to take my recycling to civic recycling. I live out in the county. I don't have curbside recycling, but I care enough about it to haul it up, once or twice a month, and make that drive into Columbia, before work or after work to drop my recycling off. So I just think that this ban it's coming at it from the wrong angle. Where you're punishing the people who kind of play by the rules. The person's going to litter. They don't care. They're going to take that paper bag they get out the window, or leave in the back of the truck or whatever. Look at my notes here just one second. I think a partial ban, like has been proposed, is going to confuse customers and businesses. You're going to walk into Menards. It's a hardware store, but they have milk. You're thinking you're going to buy a box of bolts, a hammer. What do you mean I got to pay for a paper bag to carry this out? Oh, we sell milk, but Lowe's doesn't sell milk, so Lowe's gets the plastic bag. I think it's going to confuse customers, create competitive disadvantages, and just really confuse people all across the city. And finally, a question I had, excuse me, who will police what stores can offer these bags, and what's the fine if a company offers the wrong bag unknowingly? Thank you.
There is a section of the proposed legislation that talks about a small fine. These sorts of regulations are usually policed by complaint-driven, and that's usually effective enough. I'm pretty confident that most of the stores will comply. Thank you.
Nate Brown, 3601 West Broadway. I moved here about 1.5 years ago from the neighboring jurisdiction of Montgomery County, Maryland, Washington, D.C., which has a similar but unique bag law. So in the interest of time, and I won't bore you with all the details, what's unique about D.C.'s program is the bag law's name, the Anacostia River Cleanup and Protection Fund, because that was the driving force, was the environmental concern, the number of plastic bags, crashing up the Anacostia River, which is a second river in Washington, D.C. It doesn't get a lot of attention because you can, and so it's had a big impact on the river with cleanup. The public's in favor of the law, but what makes it unique is the residents have pride in cleaning up the Anacostia River in D.C. More of the details if you have questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephen Hansen, 2904 Linwood Drive, and I'm also the chair of the Public Transit Advisory Commission. Right now, I speak not on behalf of the commission, but just of my own feelings. One of the first things is that I know as our, just being familiar with the bus riders, is that the plastic bags are actually fairly useful because you can carry more with those than you can with paper bags. So this would be a disadvantage for Columbia Transit users. So that would be a strike against it in my book. But a couple of the other things are that just in general, we know that greenhouse gas emissions will go up with this. That's virtually guaranteed just because paper bags are going to be used and they have a higher greenhouse gas input. So we know they're going up. So what benefit is this to us? Well, we say, yes, we're reducing the amount going into the environment. How are you measuring that? Is there any plan to measure it, or is it just taken on faith? So that's kind of where I'm at, is you really need to be able to come up with some sort of system to really, if you want to tell people that they can't do something, you have to demonstrate with evidence that it's bad, and what you're proposing will actually fix it. And then just in general, I think it's, yeah, we agree that, the bags in the environment are bad. However, there's a lot of, political ill will that will be driven by this. There's more important things we could do. We want to get the carts for trash because we know this will increase recycling rates. So, I would rather we put effort in towards that than into just recycling or, just banning bags. So I think in general, it's, I would say I would, try to come up with a measuring plan. Somehow you measure the impact, do education. And then if that doesn't work, say, you know what, if you don't do this, we're going to have to eventually ban the use of the plastic bags. But right away, no, you can do education first. You can try some other things. And I think overall, the community would be happier with that. All right, thanks.
Thank you. To address your question about how we're measuring this, Leah, are we doing some, is the city involved in some trash surveys that are helping measure the problem?
I think that we would want to
introduce yourself first. So
hello, my
people know
name
who
is
you are.
Leah Christian. I work in the city manager's office, and I've been helping the Energy and Environment Commission with some research related to this ordinance and how, if it does get passed, how the city would effectively implement it, and also how it affects our current operations. If the ordinance was passed, we would make an effort to baseline bag use within the city. We already have to some extent. And at this point, though, a lot of the data that I've collected, because I'm the one that's working on the project currently, is based on statistical estimations. What I would need to do, or what staff would need to do, is get data from individual grocery stores. And that would definitely be an effort that would be made if the ordinance is implemented, because it would be very important to show a reduction that results from the bag use. And currently we're actually part of a network of other cities, and I've been talking to those folks about how they do it. And so other cities that have implemented this do have measurement systems in place. And so we are working on that. It's just, we don't have it in place yet, if that makes sense. So. You mean how
repeat his question, please, for the microphone.
So he asks, what about the bags in the streams and not the bags in the stores? Because the problem that has been mentioned tonight is that it's the bags in the streams. We have a stormwater staff who has put input into the work on this ordinance. And thus far, as was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, staff estimates are that the bags make up they are the third ranked pollutant in our stormwater. As far as measuring, we could. That's another option. I think if I have to work with staff, but I think if that's something that's important to citizens, if we want it to, similar to the study that Mr. Parker mentioned, I would have to talk to staff about the availability of doing that kind of effort. There's a lot of challenges in measuring that, as the River Relief has talked about, as far as what happens to plastic bags when they enter the water stream. But I think that what I've been working on is measuring it in grocery stores. But I think if citizen input is to measure it in streams too, we can definitely work on that also. And we do. That's why we're here, is to get feedback from citizens. So,
thank you.
My name is Joan Rawson. I live at 1705 Blue Ridge Road. And I just had a question. All of us here are concerned about our environment and how best to keep our environment, whether we do it by choice or have a proposition imposed on us. But I wondered what the thinking was to exempt WIC and SNAP buyers instead of letting them come together as part of the community and participate in the proposal.
Quite simple. One of the strongest, I think, objections to this kind of legislation is that there's a kind of an unfair burden on the poorest people who spend a large amount of their money on groceries. If they've got to pay 10 cents a bag, then it is an unfair burden on them.
If they were to bring the kind of bags that Ms. Freeze talked about bringing and the kind that I bring, they wouldn't have any charge.
Right.
So that is exempting them. It seems a little discriminatory to me because it exempts them from doing what the rest of the community is doing.
It exempts them from paying 10 cents.
Right.
But they're free to bring their bags.
Which the rest of us would have to do. So.
Right. Yeah, they're free to bring their
you.
bags, though.
Hello, my name is Tiana Washington. I live at 1517 Windsor. And I think that one of the things that the committee is trying to address tonight is that the bags in the streams are coming from the stores. And what we're trying to do is eliminate that as best we can, rather than having the attitude of, well, why focus on this when this is happening? Why can't we, focus on changing it all and starting from somewhere? That's just what I've gathered. And also the single-use plastic bags, a couple of people mentioned that you can use it after you leave the store for animal waste or to line trash cans and stuff, but where does it go after that? As opposed to the bag that's been used for 15 years. After we use that trash liner or, kitty litter bag, it's going to go somewhere after that. So I think that a better mindset to be in is what's going to happen after or in the future. And I mean, I personally can't wait until the day where we can say, remember when we used to use those single-use trash, those plastic bags? Boy, what were we thinking, So, that's
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, in that case, we will try to post presentations and documents that were mentioned here within the limits of copyright laws, or at least links to them on the city website in the minutes for this meeting. And thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your opinions.